I would like to start with Matthew from Ohio. And they have a question about being skeptical about trans ideology. So let's start off strong today. Hello, Matthew. How are you?
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me back.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for coming back. So I wanted to get that conversation started again. Have you had some time to think? What are your thoughts? How do you want to start this
Yeah,
conversation
yeah.
today?
So I've been thinking a lot. This word that came up, infantilizing children, and I know I used this word last week or phrase last week, warp speed, and it looked like it was very offensive. That wasn't my intention. It was just like I saw that. That's what I felt like we were talking about when we were talking about trans children, and so now I'm looking at this word infantilizing children, and I want to know what that means or how you guys translate that in your mind.
All right, Lex, do you want to go ahead and get started on that? Yeah.
Sure. I think part of the reason why we brought up the word infantilizing was also because the discussion kind of bridged out to also just talking about like women. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I think that oftentimes the sort of traditional view of family uh, kind of doesn't acknowledge that children know things. And in particular, in this instance, that children know things about themselves. Like the idea that children can't look at mommy and daddy and see a difference and understand themselves to be more like feel more close to one parent or the other, or that like when the family gatherings happen and the women are all hanging out in the kitchen talking and the men are, watching the game in the living room, like the idea that children can't discern differences or like that they cannot know enough to know themselves to understand where they fit in that paradigm. Like there's an assumption that like, oh, if you were born with this, then you are that. Um, but yeah, there's this whole like neurological aspect to it. And we are actually finding in the research that children know their gender around the age of 3 to 5. Like they have a clear understanding, as Josie was describing about her childhood. Like many children know from a very young age and, you know, ask their parents things like, when am I going to grow a pee? And it's like, you're a girl, so you're not going to. But that person grows up and they are a trans man and they remain so. And they figure it out fully in their 20s or whatever. So yeah, I think children know things and that we should honor and respect that and give them a little bit more credence than we do.
Yeah, and just to
So
add on
yeah,
to like
yeah, please.
Well, I just wanted to add on to about the infantilization term, as well as when we kind of veered off into just women in general being sacred and need to be
Mhm.
protected. It
Mhm.
takes away the agency from women to be able to make decisions when that is put into place, right? Like that was the reasoning that women didn't have the right to vote, right? It's the idea that women can't really make the decision and they need a smarter, stronger man to make those decisions. So that is I think also a very direct example of what infantilization has looked like in this country as well. But go on, Matthew.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, and when it comes to women, I'm sure that's a whole another conversation that I probably have in a
Yeah,
whole another medium,
sure,
whatever. So right now, I really want to focus on children,
sure.
and so let's mention this idea of a child asking when they're going to grow certain body parts that men would have or women would have but don't have. Um, is that a indication that they know their gender, or maybe that's just a curious question, or how do you move forward with something like that?
In the instances where I have known a person who had that conversation with their parent, um, those people have been basically this one person was like, they had an older brother and they were born female and they were 5 years old and they asked their mom because they saw their brother's body, like they were very close in age. So they saw
Mhm.
their brother and they were like, well, I see that my body is different. So I understand myself to be a boy, is where this is coming from. It's not necessarily like the words that they used, but they understood themselves to be a boy, but saw that there was this physical difference. So they were like, well, everybody says boys have this part. When am I going to grow mine? Like,
Mhm.
assuming that it's something that happens to you as you age, because they just naturally see themselves that way. That's why I believe that this is
Mhm.
like a strongly neurological phenomenon, because
Mhm.
it seems to be a brain body map distinction. If you're familiar with the idea of amputees who have like phantom limb, it's kind
Yes.
of like it's a similar neurological phenomenon to me.
And I just want
So
to also add too, like just because some children are able to articulate that distinction doesn't mean that all children are like, so for example, there's a lot of kids who don't know how to say the words, or maybe they just don't have the language or distinction,
Mhm.
and when they eventually develop larger, better vocabularies, words start coming out. So when we talk about like instances of 3 to 4 year olds being able to understand a gender identity, that doesn't mean that all 3 to 4 year olds have the ability to understand in a way and articulate it to their parents. So it comes out at all ages, right? Like sometimes, like for me, the first time that I remember saying I wish I was a girl was 8 years old, right? But I did have the feeling of wanting to be a girl for a long time. I just didn't understand what that actually was. So I think a lot of times when we talk about like the distinctions of understanding somebody at 4 years old having this distinction, it's still very uncommon for someone to have the vocabulary to express it. But what we do understand in studies is that there is a direct understanding that it is human to understand that mommy and daddy, the brother and sister, and if they have a non-binary parent, uncle, aunt, whatever, that they also may understand that as well. So it's just that we don't have as many non-binary representation for young people to be able to understand. I actually know a family right now who is raising their baby as a baby, right? Where they're not even going to mark a gender on this child until they're able to grow up and say, I'm actually blah gender. And then that's the way it is. And the birth certificate is actually blank until that they will actually be able to articulate what their gender is. I think that's really cool. And I think that's most likely because the parent that I'm talking about is non-binary. So it makes a lot of sense for that child to be raised in a way that is ambiguous until that child is able to articulate, no, I'm a girl, I'm a boy, or I'm a they them non-binary, or whatever pronouns they choose later in life. So it is a really interesting thing, and we're going to see more people that are going to grow up in that way, where they actually have more determination of what gender they're going to be assigned at birth.
Mhm.
okay. So now, Josie, when you say that it was a long time you knew that you were female, or sorry, a woman or or girl,
Hmm. Hmm.
well, how would you classify that? Female, woman, male? How would you knew you were
When I was a kid, it was just a girl, right? Like for
a
me,
girl?
it was like the scientific understanding of like, female, male was ambiguous, just like it kind of probably
Mm,
should be for kids. Like, you know what I mean? It's just like, I want to be like mom, I want to be like dad, I want to be like the person, right? Or and so I think really when you're little, all you know is the socialization of gender and not
Mhm.
the sexes, right? And I think
yeah.
for me, it was just like the category that is woman is probably, or girl woman is what I understood as a child.
And was that in gender expression or in sexual phenotype?
It was gender expression only. I mean, well, I didn't
Mm,
understand anything else, right? Like, fortunately for me as a kid, but
mhm,
in at the end of the day, it's like I was restricted from being able to express those things, right? I was taught that it's bad and wrong and
mhm,
sinful, right? That I would think of being able to express myself as a girl. So for me, it was just in the back of my mind. I can't say anything because what I didn't express in the last story is when I told my cousin at 8 years old, where we were just playing in the room randomly. I was like, "Oh, I wish I was born a girl." And my boy cousin was like, "Ew, what?" And he ran out of the room, and a big get together, and I'm telling Mexican get togethers, at least in my household, were huge. There was 35
Mhm.
people pretty much outside that room. And it's like, "Ew, Josie wants to be a girl." And everybody looked at me, and I'm like, "No, that's a lie. That's not true. I was joking." And then basically I kept that in myself until very, very later, like 34 years old, is when I actually started to
Mm.
explore that idea again. So that is what happened, because I wasn't even it was like a thought crime. It's like, how dare you even think
Mhm.
that? Right? And so
Okay.
there was no opportunity for me to be able to express myself the way I wanted to.
Okay. And you said that at a long time you knew you were a girl before you made a decision at 8 years old. So when you say a long time, I'm obviously assuming this was a long time before 8 years old, 3, 4, 5. Do you remember what kind of age that was, or?
For me, all it is reflection, right? Like, I know at 34 years old, I came out as a trans woman, and then I started living my truth and going through that. All I can remember is at 8 years old, I remember saying it out loud. But I do know from my stories that my mother told me about how abusive my father was physically to me, that he
Mhm.
knew there were other things that I was displaying that I didn't have words to.
Got it. So now, when you have a child like that that may say, and think about this from my perspective of a traditional parent, and they say, kind of what Luxander was bringing up, oh, I want this body part, or I think, when am I going to grow this body part? This mindset that I have, when I just say, oh, no, you don't do that, and kind of move on with that and not give it too much attention. And would that be something that's abusive? Would that be something that's wrong? Or how would you categorize that?
I would say it's minimizing, especially because you know, as an adult, that we live in a world where we have plenty of evidence historically, anthropologically, like through the study of sociology and psychology. Like, we know that trans people exist and that it is a natural thing. It's a part of being human.
Well,
And like,
I'm skeptical.
there are
I'm
other
skeptical
species that,
towards those ideas.
sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, I'm skeptical towards those ideas. I see that it's happening, and I have other reasons why I believe it's happening. So I'm not saying I don't believe that this is like a natural thing that's happening. So someone who's skeptical, when I say that, not to come from a minimizing point of view, is just like, well, no, that's just not what's going on, and moving on. Does that cause any problems? Is that something that is negative to the child, or
No,
how does
yeah,
that go? Wouldn't that be
it
more of a
certainly
positive thing,
causes,
or?
yeah, it certainly causes problems. Like, if a child expresses to you as the person who they trust, like they trust you to be able to hear what they're saying and help them explore or process it, at the very minimum, you as a layperson, it might be a good thing to be like, well, maybe you would benefit from speaking to a therapist about this kind of thing, like at a certain point you can acknowledge like, all
Oh,
right,
I'm
I'm
sorry,
not an
sorry.
expert in this.
Just
Did
to
you
be
want to
clear,
jump
from that
in?
one simple statement. That one simple statement of when am I going to grow this body part? You would say, oh, maybe we should talk to a therapist about
Oh,
that.
no,
If you feel
I would
unequipped.
people can have different responses, right? Some My response, because I've raised a small person before,
Mm.
is the fact that some people have penises, some people don't, right? Like, and then move on. And if that continues to be a thing, you just let the person live their lives, right? Like, I think it becomes more of an issue when you gender it. No, only boys have penises, only girls don't have penises, right? If you just say some people have penises and some people don't, right? I've been, I know some trans kids, and one like there was, and they are still growing up, right? And they're like, and they were talking about how they have a penis, and I was like, it's okay, some girls have penises, right? And then that makes it no longer a dichotomy, because that's true, some women and girls have penises, and so it's not factual. right? It's just how we frame it is what allows the exploratory portion of that person to be able to grow, right? Because it could be just a simple like, I don't know, why don't I have that, right? And so it could be just a, kid asking questions because that's what kids do. But I think not trying to shut it down and be like, oh no, only girls, only boys, right? Now you've gendered it. Now you've sexed it, right? And a kid doesn't need to know that at that moment in time in their lives. They just need to know that some people have penises and some don't, right? And so
Well,
for me, I think it's all about how you approach this situation to just allow people to grow and develop as a human.
I see a little bit of inconsistency here, if I may, because you said that some children don't know that, but then they know they're ready for their gender. So how does that kind of meld together?
Well, children are people, and different people have different understandings. And I think if you take two 5 year olds, you could probably say that one of them is more developmentally advanced than the other. Maybe one of them is more developmentally advanced in language, and maybe the other one is much better at math or spatial reasoning, right? Like it is going to depend. And, you know, it's good to teach families how to just be supportive because children are going to come to you with questions at different ages and different kinds of questions. Like if a little girl, as you see a little girl, like she was born with a vagina and she's like, when am I going to grow a penis like my brother? You would go like, okay, well, you won't grow one. And then that child might have like an emotional reaction to that, and you kind of just have to take it one step at a time. um, because obviously, like, if that kid is consistent and insistently trans and like comes through that later in life, if you come out with like, no, you're a girl, you're gonna grow boobies like mommy, like that person I was referencing, that was the conversation and how it went for them, and they had an absolute meltdown at the idea that they were gonna grow up and look like their mom. um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I mean, it just depends on the kid. And like Josie was saying, like the idea is to just not shut it down, to be like, well, you won't grow this body part. Do you want to talk about how that makes you feel? And like open the door and let them know that you're not judging them or you're not shutting them down. And you're not assigning it to like one or the other, because obviously we know that these feelings can be persistent through into
Yeah.
adulthood.
Well,
And
wouldn't it just be
honestly,
simpler? Yes.
I just wanted to say, and honestly, if you
Mm.
don't know how to interact with that kind of conversation, that's when you actually do ask for professional help and get a
Right.
pediatric psychologist involved, right? Because there, you want to make sure that you're giving the best support to your child at all times. So I wish we normalized more pediatric psychology in this country. I feel like a lot of times in this country, we only see a pediatric psychologist when we assume something is wrong rather than just normalizing the understand of like sometimes there's just a third party that is completely unbiased and just allows their kid to explore in a space can be a better solution. So I think that's why, the idea of pediatric psychology was brought up, because if it is so foreign to you, then sometimes it's good to get professional help. But go
Mhm.
on, go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. I'm thinking, wouldn't it be simpler to just say, no, you're not a boy. Boys grow that, and you won't grow that, and then move on. Like, I don't understand why you have to like kind of figure out what type of child you're dealing with and figure out. I think it would just be more simpler, and even from a point of protecting the child, this probably goes back to infantilizing children. Protecting the child would say, you know what? Even if there is some type of trans ideology, I know you were saying last talk that that is very dangerous. It's very dangerous, which I agree with. It's very dangerous to be trans in this world. So protect the child from any type of idea like that. Wouldn't that be helping them guide them as they trust you, as you said, to even move them away from certain ideas like that?
Well,
You
the
want to be
science
open.
shows.
I was just going to
I
say,
just want to. Yeah,
go
go
ahead. Sorry,
ahead. Go
Josie,
ahead,
go
Mark.
ahead.
No, no, it's just that the science shows that there's no way you can steer somebody away from not being trans. And the
Yeah.
damage of being a trans person is when you are denied the ability to to live the way you are. I have said to you already that I was born and raised in Texas. I was not given the knowledge of trans. People steered me away from being trans to the point of physical abuse. I was not given the opportunity to understand what trans was, or even the concept that I could be trans. And guess what? I'm a trans person. Nothing changed the fact that I was a person other than me having to suffer in silence for 34 years, which I think is ultimately the most cruel thing you can do to a human, is deny them the education and understanding that there is another option out there. The longer you delay for letting somebody explore who they are, the more harm you're putting that person in harm's way. So the idea of steering them away from being trans to protect them from being trans is not the right approach. It's about making sure that the person, if you find out that they're trans, if they discovered that they're trans, is to give them a loving environment as early as possible, so therefore they're able to weather the transphobia that exists in the world, to have a support network that allows them to stay and be who they are. Because we have seen from mental determinations of the scientific studies of everything that we know about trans, care, that that is the ultimate determinant factor of preventing any type of self-harm and any type of depression, any type of those abuses that happen to trans people. So actually, it's more helpful for a trans person to let them explore that than to deny them the ability to.
And I also want to
Okay.
say that
Yes.
your child is starting a conversation with you, right? Like if they have these questions, that is the beginning of a dialogue. And if you as the parent go, no, you're a boy, and then that's the end of the conversation, like that kid is now lacking in having guidance on the subject. If you just say like, no, you're a girl, whatever, like you're conveying to them that the conversation is over and that you're not interested in exploring it further, and that if they continue to have questions about this, as many children do, then they know that you are just going to shut the conversation down. And that can have ripple effects throughout your relationship, even outside the topic of gender identity, because that kid is going to know, when I'm vulnerable, when I'm feeling upset or curious or scared, that my dad is not going to be able to listen to me. So there's just no point. And then the kid is going to talk to other people, or they're going to get their ideas off the internet. And it's just, I think it's just,
I
this
get
is
that.
one of the things about, like, hold on, this is one of the things about
Yeah,
the
please.
infantilization of children. You are in a partnership where you are trying to help guide a person into becoming a person, right? And there's this tendency to be dismissive and to use thought terminating cliches that end the conversation. But this is an ongoing dialogue. Your child is developing, your child is going to have questions. And you say that you're skeptical. I don't really understand what you mean when you say you're skeptical of, like, at least hundreds of years of well established knowledge that being trans is just a thing that humans are, spanning across time and across cultures and things like this. And I think that you might benefit from true skepticism, which is that you actually look at the data and you try to leave your biases behind, because I don't think that you can cling to being a traditionalist and a skeptic at the same time. In my opinion, those things are mutually exclusive.
Interesting. So when this idea, 'cause I feel like this child, that when the child says, "Hey, why am I not growing that?" I feel like that's a common question children ask. So I'm not coming from the point of view like, "Oh, why are you asking that? Oh, they might be trans or this and that." Like I got to shut that down. It's just that's just a common question that it's a normal question. It's an understandable question, especially if a girl's growing up with a bunch of brothers. So is
Right.
that why
So
would that
it's
be
it's the beginning
opening
of
up
a
the dialogue?
conversation.
Yeah.
You can say
Pardon?
you will not grow a penis and then follow it
Yeah.
up. How does that make you feel? Or what do you think about that? Because clearly the child has a reason for asking it. And like being curious about what motivated that question might help you understand your child better, whether they're trans or not.
Yeah,
And I'm not
and
saying
and
that's
there's
wrong
nothing
to
we're
ask.
not trying to we're not trying to say don't teach your kids about some people having penises and some people having vaginas. Like that is a very normal thing about humans that exist on the planet. And so when a kid is asking out of pure curiosity, there isn't an alarm bell that should go off. Oh my God, my kid is trans. It's just, oh, my kid
Mm.
is just curious about something in the world. And just being able to say that, you're not going to have one. You weren't born with one. But how Lux is saying, how does that make you feel? Or some people have them like your brothers, some people don't. Right. And so it's like allowing them to say, huh, and they're kids. Right. The kid asks a question like, why is the sky blue? Or why is the grass green? Oh, it's green because, it's reflecting green from the sunlight. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. And then they go play with their toys. Right. You don't need to have this intellectual,
Right. That's what
philosophical
I'm. Yeah, I agree. That's what I'm
conversation.
saying. It's like you don't need to. That's what I'm thinking. I'm like, you don't need to be like, well, what's this and what's that? Why do you ask that? It's just no. That's what boys have. And what's what girls have. And then you move
But the
on.
thing
Well,
that's the
that's
Okay,
the
well, that's
thing.
the
thing.
choice.
You're inserting the gender thing onto it instead of just saying some
Yeah.
people have them and some people don't. You are imposing your gender ideology onto a child.
Yeah. Do you see what we're
Okay.
we're talking about? Because we're agreeing, but we're disagreeing on the fact that you say boys have this and girls have this. When we are telling you, and I hope you would agree, that some girls have penises and some boys have vaginas. Like that's a real
I
thing.
wouldn't
Would
agree.
you
I
agree
wouldn't
to
agree with
that?
that. And no,
So
I
so
wouldn't
you're
agree with that.
saying
And
that a
so
trans woman, you're saying that a trans woman, see now we're getting to the crux of things, right? In this
Hmm.
conversation. So
right.
a trans woman with a penis who identifies as a trans woman that has one, so you don't believe that that person is a woman? Is that the crux
No,
of
not at
it?
all. Not even the slightest.
Well, there you go. You're no longer being skeptic, you are being deterministic. There's a
True.
completely different thing of what you were trying to say, right?
Mm.
So we have to take a step backwards, right? Rather than let's blow it out, right? Instead of talking about trans children on this particular case, because I think you and Lux and I have all gotten to the point where we have all understand what we would do in this situation. We have to now blow this back out to trans adults. So in the real world, there are trans women that exist, which a trans woman is a type of woman, and they have penises. Some of them do, right? I used to have one when I was a trans woman. I just happen to not have one now, right? It wasn't like it's not that. It's just not that. It's not that complicated, right? So we have to talk about the crux of the argument, which is if you don't believe that trans women with penises are women, why?
So I think it's a little bit complicated, and I'm kind of glad you kind of shifted there. But I might have more questions. But I'm kind of glad you shifted there because I had a question. When you said you were growing up, you said you were a girl. Then maybe obviously you grew up, and then maybe you said you were a woman. Why the sex change as well? Was that related, or did it feel more comfortable, or how did that connect?
Well, for me, it's a thing
Mm.
called gender dysphoria, right? And honestly, because we're in this forum, I usually don't explain this because it's kind of a very personal thing, but I will in this case because this is about education and learning. So I'm okay answering this question in good faith as long as you go with me in good faith. That's what I'm going to say, okay? So I had my gender affirming surgery, which I call it my bottom surgery. I had that because I felt gender incongruence with having a penis. It was that simple. It gave me psychological distress to have one, not just to have one, but when I put on clothes and for it to come out and to be visible. Even though nobody was looking down there, nobody was caring about it, I could feel it, right? So it started to get more like as I went through my transition, I was more worried about my social, my face, my hair, and all of that. But once all those things started to come together, then the dysphoria started to heighten blow. my belt. And then I decided to get that surgery, which is my, freedom as a person to determine what I want on my body. And I got bottom surgery to feel more comfortable with myself. It's really that simple. I know many women that don't go through bottom surgery and feel complete and whole the way they are. I'm just one of the few that decided to go ahead and go with this very invasive surgery because it was more important for me to go through that than to not.
Okay, so when it comes to this idea of some women have penises and some women don't, when you identified as a woman, wasn't that normal to you? Like, okay, so some women have penises, and that's what I am, a woman with a penis, and that's just what it is. Why are you saying that the gender dysphoria caused confusion in that? Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, I wasn't confused. I just knew that I wanted a vagina. Like, that's what it was. I wanted my body to conform to that particular thing. But I didn't see myself less of a woman before I had the surgery. It had nothing to do with my womanhood. My penis, my womanhood doesn't come from between my legs. My womanhood comes from inside of my head, right? And the only reason I got my bottom surgery was because I wanted to feel better when I looked in the mirror. Like, that's really it. And so for me, it's like some people don't have this for it, and I respect all people with any type of genitalia that they choose to have or not have. Like, that's really what it comes down to. So I don't think my choice of getting bottom surgery negates the fact that some women have penises and some women don't.
Hmm.
It's that brain
So,
body map distinction that I mentioned earlier, Matthew. Like that people, like some trans people seem to be born with an understanding of their body neurologically that does not match their external phenotype, which is why you have 5-year-olds asking, when am I going to grow a penis? Because their brain expects them to have one and they just
mhm,
don't.
mhm. That's where I'm getting at, because if your brain is that biological organ as well, and your brain is telling you that you're girl or female, and we talked about this in the first conversation we had about gender and sex, Luxander, being really tied into each other. So somebody has a brain, and that brain tells them that they're a girl or a woman, and not only that, that brain reflects, hey, look, your body parts are supposed to change as well. That you're supposed to have a vagina because you think or you feel, or your brain tells you you're a girl.
No,
So,
no.
okay,
I don't believe that at all. Like, that's not your
okay,
determination to be able to have that conversation. Like, at the end of the day, we're not talking to minors about changing their biology, like not their biology, but their surgical care. We're talking about making
sorry,
sure
no,
they live
no, we're
comfortably.
we moved away
Sorry, I
from
must have
minors. I understand.
misunderstood you.
Yeah, yeah. I'm
Yeah.
talking
So
more about
so
foreign adults. So we're moving away from minors for a bit. I think
yes.
what you said is okay. I wouldn't want to stay there, but I understand where you're going. That's fine. So we're
Yeah.
moving away from
I want
minors.
to focus
You
on
have an
adults. Yeah.
adult with a brain that says their biological organ says that you're supposed to have a vagina. Um, if because they also feel like they're a woman. Is that what I'm understanding? You feel like you're a
Some
woman. That
do,
means you're supposed
some
to have a vagina.
don't. Some do and some don't. It's not deterministic of their womanhood, right? Like I said before, my womanhood or your manhood doesn't stop end and begin at the in between your legs, right? It's really about how you perceive, like, the idea that there is like this biological thing inside of my body that is like, I need to have a vagina. I need to have a vagina. It's not that. It's about the fact that I preferred to have had a vagina. That's it, right? It's not as complex as you think that you're making it out to be. In reality, and we're going to go back to this to the statement because I don't want to get away from it. Is
Mm,
why do you believe that women with penises are not women? I want an answer to that question.
because they're not. I don't know how it fits, but they're
What?
men.
Hey, Matthew, can you do me a quick favor? Can you define a woman
Yes,
for me, please?
adult human female.
Okay.
Okay,
So,
yeah. Go ahead, Lux. I want
yeah,
you to
you're
go for
you're
this.
taking this position. And again, this is not in line with the research. It's not in line with historical anthropological fact. You are asserting a position that to be a woman is to be female. Now, can you define female for me, please?
Somebody with large gametes, somebody with a vagina.
Okay. So you're doing the thing where like it's like define a chair, and like there is no single definition that actually is going to include all the people you mean to include and disinclude all the people you mean to disinclude. Like there are
Yeah.
women who are born with internal testicles. They're intersex women who I know of one intersex person who their parents had a vaginoplasty performed on them when they were 11 years old because they didn't have enough depth, and they had a clitorectomy on their quote too large clitoris when they were a kid. So like this, like you're doing the literal turf thing where you're just like
Yeah.
making this assertion that is not going to include all the people you mean for it to include, and you don't have the ability to maintain that and also be intellectually honest. Go ahead, Josie.
And Matthew, I want to
would
say
say that
this.
they're the
I want
exception,
to
not
ask
the
you a really simple.
yeah.
I want to ask you a really simple yes or no question. Okay, all I want is a
Mm,
yes and no. Right?
yes,
A black woman, a
type of does.
redheaded woman. Okay, I'm going to start again. Right? A black woman, a redheaded woman, a trans woman, and a cis woman. Would you agree that all those are types of women?
No.
Okay.
Do you think an
So
intersex woman who is born with testicles is a woman? Internal testicles, like gonads inside her body instead of ovaries. She is internal testicles. Is she a woman?
Not necessarily. That would be an intersex person.
Okay.
okay.
So do you think that
So
maybe trans people's bodies could be a type of intersex bodies?
Yeah, yeah. I would say more something like that, more like a eunuch or something like that.
Okay. Do you not understand that like there are people who are born with internal testicles who don't know it until they're older, and they grow up as girls, they live their life as
give
women, they
birth.
date heterosexually. Yeah, like you realize that like womanhood like a separate construct. Like sex itself is a construct because we've decided that certain gametes equals female. Like we put that label on it and we decided that somewhere on the spectrum in between these set of features and this other set of features, we're going to label these male, female, and intersex, right? But like most people's gender and the way that they operate in the world doesn't really have much to do with that, or that their understanding of that develops separately.
Okay.
Does that kind of make sense to you? Because like this
Yeah,
is
do
the
you
it's the
understand that?
bioessentialist
Well, it's
conflation
not,
is like the thing that I run
I
into
think
problems with here.
I think there are biological anomalies, 100%. And I just want to come back to the idea of this brain thing. I feel like we were getting somewhere with that because you were saying that, and I'm not referring necessarily to children, but I'm just using it as an example. The little girl says, "Why didn't I go to penis like my brother?" And then this is kind of the leaning toward, or at least leaning on the glass of maybe trans ideology or trans. Forgive, I don't know the words, but just transitioning,
Trans
transitionalizing.
identity,
Okay.
maybe, because a child does
Yeah.
Yeah,
not
trans
have an
identity.
ideology, and most trans people don't have an ideology. Like
So
trans
Forgive me for
people
that.
exist
So
because we have this like
wait,
preference. Like I think Josie would call it a preference for some people, and it's like more severe for some people than others. Sorry, go ahead, Josie.
yeah, I just want to ask you this, Matthew. Do trans people exist?
yes, I would say these people exist.
Okay, so if a trans woman exists, is she living their lives as a man or a woman?
I would say they're presenting as a woman, but I wouldn't say that makes them a woman.
I'm not
But they're
saying does it
living
make
their
them a
life as a
woman.
woman. Like that's the question. Is she living her
Mm,
life as a woman or a man?
I would say they're trying, but I don't think it's working well.
Trying.
Yeah,
Really? Really?
yeah.
So if I was walking down the street, you'd be like, "Hello, sir."
No, I probably wouldn't say hello, sir. I
Okay,
would.
what
I
would you
wouldn't.
say?
I know. If I know you. Okay, I'll give an example. I remember when I was a kid, I was working at a grocery store, and there was a guy. This was way back in the day where it was just very different. And there was a guy. He was dressed as a woman, and I was just finished scanning it, and I said, thank you, sir, take care, sir, and totally just naturally. I wasn't trying
Sure.
to, and you know,
Sure.
I'm a teenager. So
So Matthew,
I'm not
I'm not talking about a mistake. I'm not talking about any of those things. You know I'm a trans person. I'm walking down the street. It's like, "Oh
uh-huh.
yeah, it's Josie from the line." Are you going to
Yeah.
say because you know I'm trans, "Sir"?
I'm not gonna bother you like that. I'll just be like, "Hey, Josie, how's it
But
going?"
you would say, "Hey Josie," but you would never call me ma'am?
No, I wouldn't do that.
Okay, so now we're getting to the crux of the reality of the situation, okay? Because at the end of the day, we've been trying to have this really good faith conversation with you, Matthew, and I wish you started here instead of going around the bend around trans kids, because really the conversation is about why you believe that women that are living their everyday lives, people who are living their everyday lives, trans men, non-binary people who are living as the category of woman or man or non-binary, don't exist in your eyes. And the reality is, when I asked you the question, the difference between if a black woman, a redheaded woman, a trans woman, and a cis woman are a categorical thing of woman, you said no. So what is the category of woman then, outside of the sex definition that you gave? Because essentially what you're telling me is that there isn't a difference between gender and sex. Do you believe there's a difference between gender and sex?
I think there's a difference, but as we talked about last when I had a conversation with Luxander, I feel like they're very interconnected, almost inseparable.
They're interconnected, but are they different? Is what I'm asking. Are they separable?
No, I would say they're not. That's why I said they're not
So so
inseparable.
so do you have gender with somebody, or do you have sex with somebody?
Well, we're talking about an act, so I would say,
I'm
yeah, that's
talking
sex.
about the
That would be sex.
word, because you don't believe they're different. So tell me vocabulary, if they are
Oh no,
inseparable
vocabulary. Yeah,
words.
sorry, my mistake. I thought you meant
So
definition.
so
Yeah,
so so
vocabulary,
there
two different
is a
words.
difference. So there is a
Yeah, two
difference.
different. Yeah, two different
Okay,
words.
they're two different words for why. Why are they two
Yeah,
different words, Matthew? Why are they two different
depending on
words
the
if they're not, if
definition.
they're this?
Yeah.
Oh, but the definition, which is gender, which is somebody who lives a certain way versus somebody who was sex assigned a certain way. So the reality is, we're trying to be good faith with you, Matthew, but you just said that there isn't
Hmm.
a difference between gender and sex, and now you're saying there is a difference between gender and sex because of definitions. And you wanted to play definitions games with me, saying what a woman is an adult human female. So I'm playing definitions with you. The fact that gender and sex have two different definitions, it shows that there is a complete distinctive definitional difference between the two things, which I am using your words, that there is a definition for woman, so there's a definition for gender, and there's a definition for sex, meaning that they are two different things. So if you use the dictionary, that trans women, cis women, black women, and redheaded women are all a category of a gender, which is woman. Would you agree with that?
All a category of a gender.
Wow. The gender of woman.
Well, I guess for me, if, going back,
No, answer the
my thing would
question.
be,
No, answer the
yeah, but
question. You're being bad faith now. I was good faith with you, and I talked to you about one of the most intimate things I did in my life, which is my bottom surgery. I ask you to give me the same type of respect that I have given you. Is a black woman, a redhead woman, a trans woman, and a cis woman, are they all in the same category of gender of woman? Yes or no?
no, no.
So therefore gender and sex is the same to you.
Pardon?
So therefore gender and sex are the same to you.
No, I wouldn't say they're the same thing. I would say
No, so you are
they're
now
very, very
inconsistent. Matthew, we've spent a lot of
perhaps.
time with
Yeah,
you. We've
yeah.
spent a lot of time with you, and I
Uh,
had high hopes for this call. And you're getting the
yeah.
spicy Josie, and not many people get the spicy Josie, because I have been giving you so much patience, so much love, so much care, and so much good faith that I actually thought that you were going to come into this conversation honestly. But you have now said twice that there is no difference between sex and gender, and I have defined it for you in several different ways to show you that there is a difference in gender and sex. So until
Well,
you are
Josie,
able
just
to
because I disagree with
acknowledge the
you,
reality. No, it's
just
not
because I disagree with
disagreement.
you
It's
doesn't mean
this.
I'm not coming in bad faith. We just
No,
disagree,
you're
but
not. No. There's not a disagreement when you have a logical
Mhm.
misunderstanding of the fact that gender and sex are different. And until you can
Yeah,
come up to the
I'll
conclusion of the
grant that maybe I
reality
have a
of the world,
misunderstanding. I'll grant maybe
but
that I have a
there's
misunderstanding. And
a misunderstanding
pardon?
about logic, which is the fundamental part of this conversation, which is the fact that there is a difference between sex and gender, allows us to continue to move forward in this conversation. But if you do not believe that there's a difference between gender and sex, it's impossible for us to move forward in this conversation with good faith because your logic is broken. And if you have broken logic, then there's a impossibility for us to move on in this conversation about gender and sex when we are talking about gender and sex this entire time, but the framework of what your understanding is completely debunked from the fact that there is a difference between gender and sex. That is not just a disagreement, that is just a complete impasse. Do you understand the
Right.
difference
So
between that?
yeah, I would say perhaps my logic is broken, but I did have a question that I feel like that would help fix that, if that makes sense. And that's kind of where I was wanting to get at, where we were talking about the
Fix what?
brain
Fix
saying,
my understanding? Fix my
no, my
understanding of
understanding,
between the
no,
difference
my,
between sex and so are you gonna so I'm gonna give you one chance, Matthew. One chance,
yeah,
okay?
okay, good.
I want you to work out this thing you're about to say. And if you do not come up with the logic that there's a difference between sex and gender, I'm gonna say this conversation is over and thank you for calling in. Does that make sense? Is that fair?
I mean, this is your show, totally fair. So,
Okay,
and,
so
and,
what
and
is
this
it?
question is also for Luxander as well, because I think they brought that up. So you have the brain, and I'm only bringing the child up because I heard this idea. The child says, "Why didn't I grow a penis like my brother?" Right? And is their brain telling them that? That brain state, that neurological state, is that telling them that because they feel like they are a male or a boy, that they should also grow a penis?
In this
Matthew,
particular example of the person who I was discussing, that seemed to be the motivation, was that they understood themselves neurologically to be trans, and they grew up
how
and they
does
are a
that
trans man.
question
Yeah.
sorry to
Does that
interrupt you, Lux.
question
How does that
like, does that question
question
clarify
change?
anything?
Does it clarify that there's a difference between sex and gender? Because if not, we're gonna have to move on to another call.
It could. I'm not sure. That's why we're having the conversation.
Right.
Okay,
So
well,
I'm
let's
gonna
call
say
in one
something
more
real
time.
quick. And I'm gonna say something,
Okay,
and then we're probably gonna need to wrap this up because Josie needs to get off of here in like an hour and a half. Okay. The
Okay.
brain is an organ of sex. The brain informs your understanding of your sex. Your brain is
Yes.
part of what your sex is. So if you want
Okay.
to if you want to draw like a super close distinction, or like sorry, if you want to draw no distinction between a woman and a female, um like I think again, like Josie said, we're just at an impasse with that because like there is no arguing with you. You have set an ideological standpoint that is not open to change. You are not a skeptic on this topic at the very minimum. Um, but if you could accept perhaps that the brain is an organ of sex and that like gender is the neurological or psychological understanding of our sex, then I could accept if we came to an agreement that trans people are one of many variations of intersex human beings who then live their lives with different gender roles as they get older. Like I think that we might have to just leave it there for now.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think we're leaning. I think we're leaning closer to what you're saying, Alexander. That the brain tells you what's going on in the sex aspect, but there's also that gender also kind of involves the brain as well. So from what I understand, I do believe in intersex. I do believe in eunuchs and stuff like that, and that's kind of where it lies for me in my mind. If that makes sense.
So Matthew, we're gonna move on, but I want you to really seriously think about why I am saying a black woman, a red-haired woman, and a trans woman and a cis woman are all in the category of gendered women. right? And think about the categorization of how society looks at like gender as far as women and men and non-binary people, because until you can see that, there's just no way we're going to be able to convince you that trans people and trans children exist and need trans healthcare, because that's really what
So it
this
seems,
was supposedly be about. So if you want
it
to
seems
call in
to me that you
again,
want
I'm
me
going
to
to be
agree
here
with.
next week. What was that?
It seems to me that you want me to agree with you, and I'm just not there yet. I don't think I can agree with you, and I don't think that's a good faith argument to say, well, agree with me so that we can move forward. I think we're at a really good space, especially what Luxander brought up. I would love to continue the conversation.
Yeah, and I will
Well,
be
I
here
said think
throughout
about
July as
that.
well. So you're welcome to call
Same.
back
Okay.
again. And
Yeah,
I
call
have
back
my
again.
own show where I stream twice a week if you want to come in and bother me, that's also fine. But like I do want you to consider, Matthew, that you are operating from the bioessentialist position that, as far as I can tell, it's almost impossible to argue people out of. And as a skeptic, I would hope that your values align with being open to changing your mind when you are confronted with new information. And that's all. That's all I have to say for you
Yes.
today.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for the call, Matthew. Have a great day and
Yep.
call in
Thank
again
you.
if you're ready. Okay. All right.
I
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
I
Well,
just
Lux,
wish
you were
people
there
would
for the
get to the
first time,
point.
huh? I know. Like, what is that? 3 episodes? 3 episodes? And we finally got to the point where like women are not women if they have penises, and
Yeah.
that there is no such thing as a category of women that involves
That's what
trans
we
women.
mean when we say bad faith. Like you're having a conversation about the idea of trans children, but you're operating from the position where you just fundamentally believe that trans women aren't women. Like that's what we mean by bad faith. It would be a good faith
Yeah.
argument if you started there and started with, I believe that large gamete producers are women. Like, okay, you just don't use words correctly, is what it comes down to. You use the words
Yeah.
wrong. Lord
Yeah.
have mercy.
Ugh.
Let's go to a new
Anyways,
caller. Hit the like button,
let's go to new
everybody.
caller. We're gonna go.
I
Yeah,
found
like
super
a
chats. We'll
button,
read them out
everybody.
at the end.
If you like spicy Josie, leave a super chat and let me know, because you got to see it for the first time on the show. I think this is the first time I actually raised my voice and
You
got
got
heated.
mad.
Hello, I'm Jimmy Snow, Pokemon Master and Executive Producer on The Line. Would you like to support a specific show on The Line or The Line in general? There are special tiers on our Patreon and in our channel memberships. You can do just that. By the way, you could consider leaving a super thanks down below. You could also like, subscribe, and leave a regular comment. All of these are great. Now, I'm going to get back to crushing loneliness, but while I do that, why don't you check out one of these?